it starts as a consultant, and then it's like, then it's a UX architect, then it's a senior UX architect, then it's a principal consultant, then it's head of, then it's director, and then there's a bit like Icarus, and I got too close to the sun, and I didn't drown in the sea or anything, but I sort of landed in a different place. I think I worked out that director was probably not quite where I wanted to be.
We're in. Joe, thank you for coming. It's great to see you. We haven't we spoke recently, like maybe a while ago, but we met probably, I guess, was it like 4 years ago?
Yeah, it would have been about that. And I think we spoke last time, it's probably about 2 years ago now.
Wow.
But yeah, met first time would have been about 2021, something like that.
Yeah, right in the thick of the pandemic. And you know, for people that don't know, I kind of wrote a sort of mini design obituary about you, just so that people could have some context of who they're listening to. So you started out in user research, from what I can see, and you've worked with a range of clients like Sky and BBC, and then you sort of moved into UX and service design roles at various like big kind of like 3 and big private companies, and you spent quite a while at Nemensa, 7 years, I think, as a design agency, big design agency in it's Bristol, London, and I think international, isn't it? And where you sort of grew into a role of being the director of UX, and then you've also made quite an interesting transition, which is something I'd really like to talk to you about, which is moving from the sort of agency sort of land into the NHS, you know, sort of public sector. So is that a kind of good skim through of your design life?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when I look at my LinkedIn profile, when I'm admiring it, you know, on a boring day, and I see like it's very linear. It starts as a consultant, and then it's like, then it's a UX architect, then it's a senior UX architect, then it's a principal consultant, then it's head of, then it's director, and then there's a bit like Icarus, and I got too close to the sun, and I didn't drown in the sea or anything, but I sort of landed in a different place. I think I worked out that director was probably not quite where I wanted to be.
I'm very interested in that, and I'm very interested in Icarus, because that's something that a word and a phrase I've used a lot in my own journey in design, when the ascent gets a little bit too hot. Yeah, could you tell me more about that? Why did you use that word Icarus? Or what does that mean for you?
I think so for me, I meant I got a bit too close to the organized or the sort of the senior business side of things, and a bit too far away from why I got into doing what I'm doing. I mean, I started off before getting to research in psychology, and I consider that to be sort of my primary interest. And you know, like a lot of people, you step up through the various levels, and then you get to a point. I think some people, I mean, certainly I did, realize, well, this isn't. Now all of a sudden we're talking about things like redundancies and the bottom line, and I thought maybe that's what I was interested in, but actually it's really not. It's really not. I've gone too far. I've gone too close to that side of things, and I wanted to get back to being a bit more hands-on, a bit more back to the research side of things and the psychology side of things, and actually doing things for end users a bit more.
Yeah, so you sort of stopped feeling like a designer, and started feeling like a business person.
Yeah, and yeah, a manager, and certainly at that point for me as well, I was we just had my third child last, and I was just there'd been a lot going on. There was so much had gone on in those few years, and I was starting to feel like I just had way too much responsibility in all walks of life, and it was really starting to tell. And I mean, we had a conversation about getting a dog, and I was just like, absolutely no chance, because I just felt like if I had one more thing was added to me, then
Yeah.
I'd collapse. And so it was partly that as well. I mean, at the Men's we were, it was quite a big team and quite a lot going on for a lot of people. So there's a lot of dealing with other people's issues as well as with my own.
Yeah, because I that's really interesting. And firstly, we had the dog conversation too, so I can relate with that. I've always wanted a dog, and having a child. Me and my wife, she was like, absolutely not,
Later.
and she's right. So yeah, I can relate with that, and I find that interesting. What I hear the theme of is like holding. You're holding people, holding their emotions, holding their their journey, and when you in the Mensa, like I think it was it like 20 odd people that you were sort of effectively holding.
Yeah. Yeah. And we tried to separate line management a little bit, but especially for that team, which grew quite quickly from 7 or so, and yeah, got up near 30 at one point. I was responsible pretty much for bringing all of those people in, and so I think when that happens, you feel a lot of responsibility for their careers. You want to make sure that they're happy and they're getting what they need out of things. So yeah, it's a lot to take on, and if you're trying to do that properly and you're really invested in people and you care, it can become overwhelming quite quickly unless you're careful.
I can really relate with that. I had a role at a very well known shoe company, and it was I started the role thinking it was about design, and it was, and it was about practice and developing practice and trying to implement processes and evangelizing design. And then towards the end of the time that I was there, it became about like sort of helping people navigate and orient the company as it was kind of sinking, basically.
Yeah.
And there were redundancies, and there was like people didn't know if they were going to turn up one day and just be told to leave, and suddenly I was in this role of like crisis holder or something, and it was so far away from design at that point. It was just
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't mind admitting that what I saw a lot was when it came to things like redundancies, people would be like, well, if it has to be done, I'll do it. Like I'm strong enough to do it. I absolutely hate that side of things. I mean, especially I don't want to be sort of there responsible telling someone that they've got no job. Having brought them in and we go, it's really exciting. We've got all these things that we can work on, and go, actually, for reasons completely out of our control, we've got to let you go. And I could see that was the way that things were going, and those decisions were going to potentially have to start being made. And I really didn't want to. I just didn't want to be part of that. And maybe I'm not cut out for that. Maybe I'm too sensitive to people's needs. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to tell people that they are no longer welcome. And then I also don't want to be in an environment, and this is increasingly difficult, especially where I am now, but I don't want to be in an environment where people are leaving because it creates so much uncertainty for everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Can't have ideally what you want is a team where you've got good psychological safety. People can be themselves, express themselves, and not worry too much. But you can't have that when people are being made redundant, because there's just constant low level, maybe not even low level, but anxiety and fear about what's going on. And obviously the way things are at the moment, there's a lot of that generally everywhere. And that LinkedIn doesn't really help with that, because I think the algorithm is set so that emotional type posts seem to get, do really well. You hear a lot of stories, don't you, about people who've been out of work for 6 months, and I think a lot of that's America. But anyway,
No, it's something that it's a really live topic. So I agree with you. There is this sort of conflation with the US market, but it's some people I know, and
really,
it scares me when I see people with 20 years experience saying they're remortgaging their house, like that
Yeah.
freaks me out big time. It taps into like one of my deepest fears of something that I never had in this industry. I was always, people would say, "Oh, you worried about?" I'd be, no, I just get a job anytime. You just jump
Yeah.
around, And it's now, it feels like that time has ended, and we're in a different era, and there's a sense of scarcity, and when you think about all this froth in the market, there must be loads of people in jobs that don't want to be there, but they're hanging in because it's kind of like, I don't know if I can get another job, and what the future holds. So
Yeah.
it's a really strange time. It didn't used to be like this.
No, a lot of things in design and UX are really cyclical, aren't they? You have the same conversations about titles and
Yeah.
prototype, all these things. They just, lorem ipsum is another one. They just come round in cycles. But with this particular thing, it doesn't feel like a cycle that we're going to just spring back out of.
No.
Because before I joined the NHS, when I was starting to talk to recruiters, they were saying the new year will be when things will change, and that was in
Yeah.
2023.
Yeah.
And they were saying, look, it'll come back next year. And it just hasn't.
Mm.
18 months later, and it's still not looking amazing. But I will say, I do think there's lots of people in jobs that are sort of worried and are sticking. I do think it is a bit of an iceberg where you've got a very vocal minority potentially creating a lot of noise around it that may well be based in fact, but I do think there's an awful lot of people that are just sort of not on LinkedIn, that are just quietly getting on with their job. Whether they're happy or not is a different question, but I do think it's not quite as bad as perhaps we're getting the
It
impression of
gets
it.
amplified, perhaps.
Yeah.
There's something that struck me in this market froth, and then you talking about your time at Nemensa, and in the role you're in now is because, and for the people that don't know, like you briefly managed me. We worked together briefly for a few weeks, and something that I experienced from you and something that you've written about is like authentic leadership, and like something that I've tried to convey. And in that example I gave at the shoe company, I was trying to be authentic. I was trying not to bullshit, and I wanted to be a manager that people genuinely trusted, and I sort of had a kind of friendship with, if you like. But I found that authentic leadership in times of massive uncertainty and change is desperately needed and fucking hard.
Yeah, it's really difficult because you'll be in a meeting with the board and you're talking about how things are not great, we might have to lose people, and then you go into your team meeting. You can't just come out with that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
So you're forever holding on to that, and you're forever making judgments about how you best set the tone, and how you best give people the truth, so that when things do happen, it's not a massive shock, but at the same time, don't create lots of panic. Really, really difficult.
yeah. It's a real tightrope, and something I see that you've written about as well, which might fit into this too. You've written about like introversion, being an
Yeah.
introvert. How does an introvert navigate this type of timeline? Because it seems like, yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, I think the introversion thing, I mean, certainly when times are difficult, I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference necessarily. But certainly in terms of authentic leadership, I think the introversion thing's been really interesting for me over the last 12 months being in the NHS,
Mm,
because because I'm quite reflective anyway, and I've read Quiet by Susan Cain. I've thought about this stuff quite a lot. I had quite a clear picture of what I'm like and how in the environments in which I thrive. And then I got into the NHS, and it didn't fit at all with that environment. It's
yeah.
quite, yeah, where I work in screening is it's it's great. It's got loads of positive. I think everyone would admit though it's quite an extrovert environment. There's lots of very big meetings and a lot of, I think, credit given to um, people who speak up
Mm.
in those meetings and people who challenge a lot. And I went through this long period of trying to fit in with that rather than accepting what I was like and leaning into that. So I went through this long period of being like, I'm really struggling here. Why am I struggling so much? I'm not speaking enough. I have to speak more. I have to be more visible. And that I found really draining because that just doesn't suit my personality at all.
Do you think value was almost measured in sort of audible presence?
Yeah, I think it definitely can be in certain circumstances, but I do think there is another way of going about it
Mm.
that is accepted and is fine. But I just I couldn't locate it, and I was getting
Mm.
into a really bad headspace as a result of that, and I was sort of sliding down into this kind of victim space where I was feeling like there's loads of stuff going on. There's a bit of an us and them type scenario where I was feeling like there's all this stuff going on and I'm not a part of it. And everything that was happening was like a really bad thing um, for me and towards me. And I had to just have this massive reset. I actually had a conversation with a coach, and I was just complaining about something, and he said like, who does this serve? Who does this attitude serve? And I was like, well, it doesn't serve me. And I thought about it, and I was like, it really doesn't serve me. Like, why am I doing this? Like, I could be so much better. I just need to completely reframe how I'm approaching things,
Wow.
lean into the one-to-one type chats and lean into the deep thinking work and just don't worry about speaking on big calls. Just try not to worry about it. And actually you can follow up with things, you can write things in chat. You can influence in other ways. It took me too long really to kind of realize that.
So you had a sort of introvert's playbook that you developed for yourself about how do I influence and how do I thrive in under my own terms, you know, in this
Yeah.
environment. And it sounds like you like accepted the bits that you won't necessarily thrive in because that's not where your strength is, and you developed like different routes and channels to create influence. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah. And I also realized I stepped away from one of my sort of core things, which is around vulnerability.
Mm.
I wasn't talking to anyone about how much I was struggling, really. I was just trying to deal with it and reflect and work my own way through it. It's why it's important to have like coaches and therapists and things. Sometimes just articulating it out loud helps, but I wasn't I wasn't doing that. I wasn't telling anyone. And so actually when I started going through this bit of a reset, which was sort of a couple of months ago now, I just sort of put it out there. Like I've not been doing very well. Like I've been really struggling, and I'm going to try and get better. And this is how I'm going to do it.
What happened when you started to be more vulnerable? What changed?
People responded to it really positively, which is the most disappointing thing, isn't it, in hindsight? Because you're like, oh, I should have done this before. But people responded to it really positively, and actually, a lot of people sort of came to me and said, "Yeah, me too. Like I'm really
Really?
struggling with it too." Like so, I think a lot of people were like the NHS and like public sector organisations. I think it's just like these massive machines, they're like these big systems, and it's quite slow, and there's so much happening. And the Prime Minister abolishes your organisation 1 minute in public before you even know about it, and it's like there's a lot going on, and you can get away from. And of course, like leadership are always like, if you've got any problems, come and talk to me or whatever. But it doesn't always feel like that's an option. And how much do you want to be honest and vulnerable when there are so many big changes going on? It's it's a bit of a
Do you,
fear. Got this low level stuff about, we were just talking about losing jobs, redundancies, and things like that. You maybe hold on to things a bit more.
do you think there's like an unsaid fear of like if you express vulnerability and that, mental health challenges, things like that, that then there's conversations, redundancies, and the people that are seemingly vulnerable in that way might be sort of marked out. Is that what you're implying a little bit?
Well, the thing is that I don't think that that's actually true.
It's not true,
You've
but it feels like it's true.
but it feels like, well, and that's the whole essence of vulnerability, isn't it? Is you've got to
Mm.
it's putting yourself out there, it's being vulnerable, and I think, perhaps feel more reluctant to be vulnerable when there's other things going on. But that feeling is normally wrong, and it's normally just it's like a human thing that you're holding on to.
There's something that sort of like feels like a push and pull for me with vulnerability, that it's sort of I have this idea of, certainly when I'm doing, consultancy stuff, that I have to be this like brash kind of, I've got the answers. Here we go. Choo, choo, choo. Like I feel like there's this expectation somehow that that's what I need to be. And I, when I see other people do it, I throw up in my mouth because I'm like, that's horrible. Like that,
Yeah,
it feels like arrogant and all this. And so I feel that pull to do that. And then I also desperately want to bring in human connection and authenticity. And sometimes I've managed to do that in corporate environments and it's been very successful. And sometimes I've had to make a call to go, it's not safe to be vulnerable with that person. Like they don't want to, like, I don't have that type of relationship that's possible,
yeah,
especially in remote. I found I've had to really like measure my rationale about when to do that and when not. And sometimes I get that wrong, but do you know what I mean? Like it can't be vulnerable all the time, and it has to be sort of considered, I guess.
yeah. There has to be an element. Yeah, there has to be an element of safety, psychological safety with it. You have to feel like you can put yourself out there, but there has to be an element of trust that it's not going to be abused. It's going to be taken in the right way. And with some people, yeah, it's not welcome. But as long as you can find people, I think, and you've got a culture which leans itself slightly towards that, I think it's important. Also, the other thing about vulnerability is if you hold on to things too much, then you can't really expect people in your team who report to you, etc., to be vulnerable as well. So I think you've got to demonstrate a little bit of it to say it's okay to talk about this stuff. And if you've
Mm.
got similar problems, then and you want to talk about them, then that's okay, and I can listen and help where I can.
I,
If you're
also,
closed off, yeah, I'm just gonna say, if you're closed off, you're sending a message that that's the vibe.
yeah, that's, yeah, I completely agree. And I was remembering as you were saying that an incident where, um, yeah, I was working with someone and they were going on maternity leave and they really wanted a laptop, whilst they were like a Mac and stuff. And it was really important to them. And it was in a kind of whole culture of like redundancies and stress, and everyone was on like high level, and things that might not seem that important were very important.
Yeah.
And it I remember it escalating with that person, and it got so like tense and important to them. And then we went for a walk together, and I actually cried in front of her, and I was like her manager, and I cried in front of that person. And I I never really checked in with her like what she thought about that. And it did occur to me later. I was like, God, yeah, she's probably told quite a few people, because that's quite a surprising thing to see, and it wasn't a particularly safe environment. And hearing what you're saying now is making me feel a bit more reassured that perhaps, it modeled something positive. I mean, it was one on one, it wasn't in a big space, but it's something that has always stayed with me a bit of like, yeah, I did that, God.
You should ask her. I bet she'd say that she found that really reassuring, that it's okay to be yourself and to be open with how you feel. And
Yeah.
it is really. I think there's something to be sort of proud of, if you like. I mean, especially for men to kind of demonstrate some actual emotion is a positive thing. It's not obviously suitable for every environment, and you're not going to do it, as you say, in big groups and things. But
Yeah.
I think it sends such a message that no amount of you can talk to me about it. You can say you can talk to me about anything as much as you like. It doesn't mean anything, I think, until you actually demonstrate that it's okay by doing it yourself. And
Well, this is all going to put us on a path if we're not talking to burnout. I would think,
yeah,
of not having an outlet, not having a way to release it, whether that's in work or not. But
yeah.
it's something certainly that I've spoken about before of experiencing burnout, and I think you've talked about it a bit too. And I just it, I just feel conscious of the younger generation and how harder things are for them and how prevalent burnout might be, and then throwing, long COVID and all these kind of things. And I don't know if like, do you think there's something about designers that make us almost more susceptible to burnout, than perhaps other practices, or do you think there's nothing unusual about us in that way?
I don't. Uh, I don't think there's anything unusual about us in that way. Would be my initial reaction. I mean, you get perfectionists and things like that in all sorts of jobs. There might be something about it that kind of lends itself to it a little bit, but I don't think so. I mean, I've certainly seen other people that are in the throes of burnout that have not been designers, that have been in other roles. So I don't think so. Would be my initial.
Yeah, I just sort of wondered it. I think when we do work that is more subjective and is less evidence based and is more like critiqued and stuff like that, then I feel like there's more pressure. And it was something that when I moved from web design into like UX, it was a relief for me because it was just sort of like, oh well, my work doesn't necessarily just get okayed by one person, and that pressure felt like really
Yeah.
intense. Whereas when it was like, oh, we'll just user test it, and it was just sort of like it felt a lot safer for me actually, as opposed to like a creative director kind of waving the wand of approval,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it can depend, kind of. I think you can be in certain roles where you're not a designer, but you're very much at the whim of other people. You're a product person. You're creating decks, and people are just pulling it apart all the time and going, "What's all this about?" Um, Same with developers and things like that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting with burnout. I think that like, can you always, something I thought about is like, can you always tell when you're experiencing it, or is it something that you look back on hindsight and go, oh, that was a bad time. At the time I didn't quite. I feel like when you're going through burnout, you're just trying to desperately do everything you can to make yourself feel better, but you're not thinking, oh, I'm really burnt out necessarily. Is that what
And
you've experienced, or do you think that when you're in it, you know it?
when I so when I burnt out, I was about 30, and I was in my first consultancy gig. Yeah, first proper consultancy gig. And so there was like a lot of like new things, high pressure. It was also like Wild West consultancy land. I don't know if you brushed into that, but like there was a period in like the sort of early teens, where UX were just like sort of thrown right at the client as the kind of, we owned the project and we were like the god mode and all this, which was like so much pressure really, and totally like, there weren't account managers, we were just like doing everything. And I got thrown into that, and then I had a lot of friendship groups that were shifting, and I was feeling a bit like lost and not like connected to a social network. And I also had come back from backpacking, and I didn't have a place to live, so I was hopping on sofas. So loads of systems were like new and not safe, and I didn't have anything to ground me.
Yeah,
And I think I would just feel like I had to keep going, and I felt like this pressure to the agency, who weren't very nice to me at all, but I had this sense of like, I didn't want to let them down somehow. And I could, like, saying I can't do this anymore was sort of like not something that like wasn't an option. And I think the words I used to say to myself was, what choice do I have? And I had created these barriers of choice. And then I think there was a moment where I said to myself, this is just about money. This is just about money, really. And I don't enough that I could be unemployed for at least a few months. So when I think I realized that it was about that, and then coupled with having a few nights of insomnia in a row, and I kind of hit the buffers. You know, it was just like, I can't do this. But I didn't know why. I didn't have a name for it. And I think
Yeah.
I was freaking out that I had some disease or something was wrong with me. I did all these tests and nothing came back, you know. And then eventually they thought it was ME and chronic fatigue. But it was quite a painful journey in, really, to realizing that. Does
Yeah.
any of that resonate with your experience?
Yeah, well, not quite as bad as that, but what's interesting, I think, is with burnout is that it's like everything narrows, and everything just sort of seems to start crowding in around you, and you feel like your options just become more and more limited, as you were saying. Like you feel like, yeah, what choices have I got? And you very much that this is where I think I was getting to recently before I caught myself, was that I was, yeah, getting into that thing where I just felt like I had no autonomy. I had no choices. I just had to keep going. And yeah, it's horrible, isn't it? But all this stuff, does make me think that I think about some of the stuff that I've been through, and it does make me think, like, you just don't know. When you're managing people and you're talking to people and they might be a bit off, and you go, okay,
Yeah.
I wonder what's going on. And people who've got so much stuff going on, and you're not just managing resource and lines on a spreadsheet. They're people with all their different, and they go have ups and downs and all sorts of different things going on. It's more important then, I think, that you're able to create some kind of safety where they feel like they can actually talk to you about that stuff, because otherwise all you can judge them on is the work output, and that doesn't seem like a very good.
Yeah, and I think there's, and that comes like the theme of the podcast really is like deeply human, and it's sort of like who am I working for, and like why am I working here? Like what's the real thing? And I for me, like I don't know about you, but often for me it's actually been the relationships are the motivators for me, a sense of like camaraderie, a sense of wanting to be recognized, to please somebody that I respect. Like it's those relationships that drive me. And if those relationships are toxic, my motivation just kind of and I just can't move. Like my hand doesn't move the mouse, because I don't care. That's how my system computes it.
Yeah, I found that in the last couple of years, I'm really, really motivated by like the kind of ownership of the organization that I'm working for. So when I was at Nemensa, I loved it in many ways, and it was privately owned, so I knew who the owners were, I knew exactly who the owners were. When we had wins, like we won some sales, it was like that was all of us, and it was great. And it's like, yeah, they did well, but they took all the risk. So I was like, they can do well, they can have the money, like that's great for them. I didn't mind
Mm.
that. But then we got bought, and
Yeah, I heard
it
that.
just
Yeah,
shifted
did it
overnight. Yeah, because we were
overnight?
all of a sudden owned by investors. They don't care. They don't care about the work.
No.
You could go and win some great little project for a charity that's worth 10K or something, and you're like, you love it, and the team loves it. It's great. It's like really interesting little project. They don't care. They just see the bottom line and like, not interested, and almost immediately, like, the wins don't become our wins anymore. They're like they just become a line that someone's interested in terms of getting them, return on investment. It just completely changed everything
Was
for me.
was that the one of the? I mean, that makes a lot of sense to think that you then went to public sector.
Yeah,
Was that the sort of ingredients that
yeah, yeah.
created the drive to making the jump that you made?
Exactly that. Well, it was definitely one of them. I mean, because yeah, I at that point I was like, right, I've got a lot of experience at this point. I've got some skills, expertise. Where do I want to put that? And I thought, I really want to. I don't want to put that into some organization where there's, some CEO who's on 500K who's jetting off or whatever and throwing instructions at everyone. I just don't. I don't want to do that, or that's profiting off things that are destroying the world.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I just I don't think that's what I want to contribute to.
Do,
And so
do
the
you feel
NHS came along at that point. It was perfect.
do you feel like that's a place of privilege that we can, as people that have a fair amount of stuff on our CV, can speak to? Because I'm thinking for some people, you know, who have less experience, you might just take what you get, you know?
Yeah, and it's important to try and withhold judgment, isn't it? Because what works for me is not necessarily going to work for someone else. But gambling is one. So
Yeah,
I for betting companies in the past, like long time ago when I was in my first agency,
yeah,
it was really interesting from a psychology perspective. It's a really, really interesting space. But then I grew over time. I mean, I changed over time. I was like, I wouldn't work for a gambling company now, but 15 years ago, I might have not thought about it that much and might have done
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
people do it. I mean, you get well paid in those organizations, and people have their own decisions to make, don't they? But
Yeah, yeah,
I,
and you got a family, you've got whatever, like everybody kind of rationalizes it. I'm
yeah,
smiling because my first job, I was unemployed for 6 months when I got to London, and I didn't have any work, I was trying to make it. It's like 2002, and I got offered two jobs at the same time. Got offered one at a travel company and the other one at Playboy. And, I was like 20 or something. And of course, all my mates are just like,
Playboy. Yeah,
of course. And you know what? The reality, and spoiler alert, I didn't choose Playboy. Um, but the reality, like actually, you hear like, something like Playboy and all that. But the reality was like, it's kind of quite sleazy. Like I
well,
went into this office, it was like way out of London, and you go in there and I'm getting in this lift, there's all like boxes and stuff, it's all just kind of like some side office and stuff. And it was like obviously making like flash banners, animated flash banners. It's just kind of like, and it was actually my mum, and she just said like, you don't know what jobs you might want to get in the future, and if you have that on your CV, it might actually not be a good thing.
yeah,
And I was probably, yeah, I probably that probably swayed me, but it there was something icky, I think,
yeah.
about
It's
you
a
know.
bit grubby. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It wasn't. It didn't. It wasn't the same kind of cool feeling that maybe immediately came from it. It was. It was. I felt something else, like kind of
yeah,
uncomfortable. And that, retrospectively, I'm like really glad I made that choice. You know,
yeah,
it was more money as well, but I guess that's what we all have to think about.
yeah. Well, there's a thing in there as well, isn't there, about identity? So identity, I think, is like really it's not talked about enough, but I think it's like it plays a huge role. Like it's the stories that we tell about ourselves. So like 8, 9 years ago, I got divorced, and I
Oh,
think like that's just like the biggest identity change that you can make because if it happens quite suddenly, which it did in my case, you go from a point where you're like a family, and in your mind, you're like, I'm married. This is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. This is married. And then it can be like 2 months later, it's like, now I'm separated or whatever, and I'm getting divorced. And now my future is completely different. It's completely wide open. And the labels that you've got, you're not married, you're separated or you're divorced, whatever, it changes how you think about yourself completely. That took me
mm.
so long to get used to. And I think it's a similar thing with work that your identity is wrapped up in what you do to an extent, and the stories that you tell yourself and the stories that you tell other people. And there's a big shift, I think, from agency to being perm public sector.
From an
Uh,
identity perspective,
yeah, and also
really.
from perspective of other people and the expectations and things like that.
Can you tell me more about that? How does your identity feel different?
I mean, I was certainly like proud. I think I was proud when I worked at the men's, but I was more proud at that time, which I don't really like admitting, but more of the job title. So if anyone asked me, I'd be like, oh, this is my job title, or I work at a design agency, because they never would have heard of the design agency. Whereas now
Yeah.
it's like, I work at the NHS. So I always pause for a round of applause at that point, which no one gives me. One person has, bless them. But they deserve it. But yeah, I think now it feels like quite a big pride thing. But I do think you're treated quite differently as a perm member of staff versus contractor and agency coming in. There's some perceptions that are going on there that you kind of have to battle with a little bit. There's a perception, I think, that if you go perm public, this might be just me projecting, but if you go perm public sector, then you're either in it for the kind of politics and the wheeling and dealing to try and you're on the make to be as ambitious as possible, or you're there for a bit of a holiday. You know, like when I told someone I was starting in permanent NHS, and they're like, oh, that's good, you'll be able to start at 11 and finish at 3, which of course is not the case at all. But there's this perception that you're just there for a bit of an easy ride. I think that can then play out a little bit actually when you're in the role itself. Like people don't see you as very, or as dynamic.
Do you think there's more of a sense of like responsibility as you're working? Because you think of it like where you're working in an agency, I think there's more glamour, like UX director, Don Draper, and it's like kind of, that you go to the office and it's quite flush. It's probably a football table, and it's kind of funky, and there's this sort of fresh feel to it, and the creatives around, and whereas I imagine it's not quite the same in an NHS office, but I kind of wonder, like with the private sector, that there isn't quite that sense of like appreciation of like long-term impacts. Like you kind of work on a project for 4 months or something, and you're not really there to see what happens afterwards. And I'm thinking about your like values and who you work for and identity. Like, does that aspect of it feel different when you're actually like in-house for the government effectively?
Yeah, I think that you are more invested. I mean, it's natural that you would be, because if you're agency, then you could be moved off it pretty quickly and you can be onto something else, and you
get rotated.
you can get excited about that. Whereas I think when you go perm, you make quite a commitment, and there are some sacrifices that you make as part of that. Some of the bureaucracy and things like that you have to put up with. So yeah, there is a real investment that you're there to, in my case with screening, I have to, in my mind, say, right, I'm in this for the long haul, because things aren't going to change really quickly. It's really complex. We've got to be really careful. And like the clinical space, you can't afford to miss someone out of screening, because it can have huge impacts for that individual. So all your edge cases are really important. You've got to really think about them, even though it might only affect 2 people. You've still got to think about them. And so things take time, and it's not necessarily easy, but I do feel like that's what I'm committed to, in a way that in an agency, you're never committed to a client. You might say you are, but ultimately there's a contract that might come to an end, and that you'll have to move on to something else. So it's slightly different.
I think about and it's a conversation that's happening a lot at the moment, is metrics and outcomes, and how our value is measured. And you think about with an agency, it's kind of measured by like, did you complete the project on time, on budget? What was the lead client liaison person happy? Like, and it's usually one person, and it's like, oh yeah, is Jimmy, is Sally happy? Yeah, they're happy. Then that's kind of the measure. Whereas with public sector, like, from my experience as well, we're looking at quite like serious impacts, be it people's health, lives, and as you say, like especially because in service design too, you're really looking at that. Like, I imagine you're looking at like that much broader picture and societal impacts, as opposed to just kind of, a sort of a website that has 2% conversion or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really big. It's really interesting. I mean, I've always said with screening in particular, like if you can change the dial just a little bit and you increase uptake by a percentage point, that would be an outcome that you might report on. But that would have more than that percentage point being interesting. That's a huge impact on like a huge number of people because it's
Mm,
population wide. It's massive stuff, and that's I find that hugely motivating to
mm.
work in a space like that. And then to hear of it's interesting because I don't know if you saw when Keir Starmer announced that the NHS England was being abolished.
I saw it and I thought of you. I thought, oh,
Well,
he's
at that,
joined.
I thought of me as well. At that time, it was interesting because we were in this thing called Big Run Planning, and it was all of products and platforms talking through all the work that they'd been doing. And it was really interesting. So it wasn't like screening's just part of that, but it was interesting hearing about how, like, in the triage, they'd improved the triage process so that they were sending out 11 fewer ambulance visits or something like that in this one area that had piloted this thing, all UCD driven. And it was amazing. I was like, that's huge, massive impact, saves money, great stuff. And it was just a day of hearing this really great stuff. And then there's this like ripple coming around the room, and everyone's checking their phone, going, and then we find out
Wow.
that the NHS England is being abolished. But you got to say that it's not, it can't affect the digital side of things from what we're
Yeah.
doing in prevention, because it's saving money. If you got rid of the teams, then you'd start losing money, or you wouldn't be making the savings that you need to make. So
Yeah, because digital has always been since I started it. I mean, I have a slight discomfort in one aspect in that it saves money, but in some ways it's also like going to be changing other people's jobs, and maybe that even leading to redundancies. I mean, I remember when I got into retail, it was like we were effectively competing the website against the call centers, and the better the website, the less call center people you needed. And in
yeah,
some ways, like that is the nature of the workforce. It's always changing. It's always morphing. Some bits contract, some bits expand. But I have always had that thought in my mind that like digitalization does have impacts to people that we don't necessarily immediately think of, in other
yeah.
roles, even if it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Well, a lot of our work is with clinicians and mammographers and people that are carrying out, and
Right.
actually
Yeah.
they're doing so much on paper
I
still.
see.
They're,
Yeah.
they're, they're in disjointed systems where they log into one place and then they have to go and update the data in a different system using a paper form that's been passed through. Some of the stuff is really bad. So actually, I know what you mean, but in this particular case, I think by introducing better systems and services and processes, you're actually making their lives better as well, because it gives them they can then worry less about making mistakes, which again can have huge consequences,
So
and
it's,
they can focus far more on the individual
yeah,
and
so it's
write a
about
much
it's about workflows and helping
yeah
people work better. I'm curious, like in relation to that type of work, it's something that I'm still sort of feeling through. It's GDS, and it's something I'd heard of long time ago when I was in the private sector, and it was like, oh, the GDS is like this cool way of working, and it's all like UCD, and then now I'm doing more and more public sector projects, and I'm seeing some aspects of it that I think are really good, and some aspects of it that I don't see working as well. And yeah, I can speak more to that as well. But I was curious what you think in terms of like like what is GDS good at and what's it not good at?
did you mean in terms of like like the discovery alpha live, the service
Yeah,
standard?
the
Yeah,
templated way of setting up a UCD team, because in
yeah,
private sector it tends to be a little bit more like, I know the agencies have a bit of a model, but you sort of like shape it a little bit more around, the need. Whereas GDS is quite like, we'll always have a beta, we'll always have an alpha discovery, etc.
yeah. Well, yeah, it doesn't work amazing. I mean, I've been doing like quite a lot of work in our area to try and get people thinking about the service standard more. But you do need more pragmatism than that. And I think in terms of the roles and the way teams are structured, we don't. We're a bit too rigid. I think perhaps sometimes in a particular space, what you need is a generalist. But actually, in order to set the team up right, we need to have a content designer, an interaction designer, and a service designer. And it's like, okay, I don't think that quite works. We also, there are teams that are making changes to products, so they're not necessarily, they don't have to go through a full service assessment in the same way, because it's not an end-to-end service that needs to be assessed. It's like product tweaks. And so then people don't think about the standards and the things that they need to actually achieve in order to make it right. So accessibility plays a huge role. So for us, it's like an interesting tool to try and ensure that we're doing things in the right way, but we cannot and won't ever apply it rigidly, like this is the only way we can do it. We have to certainly take the design principles and the service standard, those points, and go, this is how we need to be doing things. Because they make total sense. They're probably how you'd want to do them even if you didn't have to do it that way. But in terms of like the actual phases, we probably need to be a little bit more flexible.
No, it's reassuring to hear, because I think I've seen, like, I've appreciated how I don't have to sell UX in, and people know what I'm doing and all of that. I've really appreciated that aspect. I've just seen GDS used on like slightly strange projects, where I'm kind of like, I don't know if you need a GDS. Like, it's quite a big, it's a big tool. It's quite, it's a real big thing. If you want to do this, it's like, well, okay, we're going to have like stand-ups, we're going to have like different roles. If you want to like is this the best problem to throw GDS at, or could it just be done with a BA, and a solution architect just analyzing something for, or user research, just having a look at it for a month or something. Like, I haven't always felt that reasoning has happened in the experiences that I've seen, but
I think what you're basically victim to being a public sector there, which is that sometimes it happens and you can't quite work out who's decided it should happen in that way, why, and it's not. Whereas in an agency, I think you'd sit down for maybe like 20 minutes and you go, it doesn't make sense, let's not do it, and you won't do it. Whereas it just doesn't work like that. There's been multiple meetings. It's probably gone through approval and business case, and it's said, oh, we're going to do it this way. There might not be a designer at all involved in any of that. And then it kind of comes down. It's like, no, now you've got to do it this way because this is how it is.
I know that one very well. I'm usually the one that it lands on. I'm like, right, what's this mess we've got to untangle?
Yeah. And that's part of the skill of it, I suppose, is and part of you need a bit of, I think, resilience almost to kind of accept the constraints that you're working within sometimes are self-imposed by the organization that you're working within.
I think that's such an important point, that particularly for new people in the industry, they might not expect that, where they've got an understanding of what design thinking is and GDS, and then they get in there and then there's like, oh, I can't rigidly apply the process here. I've got to be a bit adaptive and things like that.
Well, that's why it's a bit mad to me that you've got so many people with so much experience that are struggling with work, because those are the people that have experienced lots of different things, and so therefore know how to go about things in different ways, and they know when to pick a tool up and when to put a tool down, when to apply a methodology and when to just leave it alone, when you've just got to go for it, when you've got to follow a process. Whereas if you're fresh out, you're just applying theory, I think you've got to be much more pragmatic than that in the real world.
The market just does not like generalists. I keep saying it in every conversation I've had. The market doesn't like generalists anymore, and it boggles my mind, because as you say, like in GDS projects, they're really good at that. It's a great place for a generalist to be, because you end up cutting across so many roles. And I really hope that even just by talking about it more, it gets people thinking about that.
I think it's a real shame for individuals as well who start out their careers and they perhaps go, well, I've got to choose one of these design, so they go down interaction design, and then they might not get, if they stay in the public sector, they might not get many opportunities to experience what content design is. That's probably the best thing about an agency, is that you kind of get thrown into various different things and you learn all about them and then make a call on what works for you.
Yeah.
It's more interesting, and it's much more better for your development, I think, than just going down one quite narrow track and
Yeah.
then to stick to it.
I think, yeah, and I would say that's a good thing perhaps for people to think about in this uncertain time, is building adaptability and resilience within your practice, because like we don't know where the sector's going, with AI and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, even though no one likes generalist, I still think it's a good thing to be, because you're kind of hedging your bets as opposed to kind of just going hard on one thing and then that just gets rinsed out. Um,
Yeah.
with the next GPT.
Well, I think I agree. I think there's so much to learn, and there's so much interesting stuff out there. Like going and learning a bit about how development works, and learning a bit how product works, and going. There's so much to learn, and going and actually, you could spend. The thing is, a couple of months will just fly by. If you picked up something for not like 15 minutes a day, you could actually pick up a real skill in 2 months. That's actually quite useful, and I think people need to think broader in design generally than just overly focus on design itself. Like I, for example, don't read design books because I don't feel like I'm going to learn much from them. What I do is try and read very broadly, and what naturally happens then is I think about how that thing then applies in the design world. So if you read a book like The Power Broker, which was like a very famous one during the pandemic. I think it was in everyone's bookshelves behind them when they were during the
Yeah,
pandemic. That book is great. It's really interesting, but it's not related to design really in any way. And there's loads of lessons in there about power structures and how they move that could be really beneficial to you in your career. So my advice to people who are starting out is to think about design, keep it in the back of your mind, but read really widely and experience a lot of things, and bring that to your work, your individuality and your different thinking. And that's what creativity is, right? It's about joining different things up.
I
And you
think
need those different things, therefore, to expose yourself to.
I think that's a great point to end on, Joe. I love it. Yeah, and add vulnerability onto that list too. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a really nice point to draw a line under. So yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Actually, it's been
It's
really
like,
good I'm trying to model, particularly men talking about feelings and bringing it into different spaces that people might not expect it. And I think you're one of the best people I know in the industry to do that. So thanks for coming on today and sharing your experiences. It's been great.
thanks, Danny. Appreciate it.